Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the real daily life of a slave in the Roman Empire. Forget what Hollywood told you, this isn't about oiled gladiators. Nope. This is about survival, sweat, and the quiet art of not getting whipped for sneezing at the wrong time. Before we jump in, hit that subscribe button if you enjoy deep dives into the weird corners of history, and comment below where you're rewatching from. Bonus points if you're currently lying in bed pretending you don't have work tomorrow. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and imagine this. You're not a modern human with Wi-Fi, coffee, and air conditioning. You're a Roman slave, and the day's about to begin. You wake up before the sun even thinks about rising. No alarm clock, just the bark of your overseer and the sound of someone else getting yelled at first. Lucky them. Your bed? It's a pile of straw. Maybe a rough wool blanket if your owner isn't a total sociopath. It smells faintly of sweat, mildew, and resignation. You stretch, but quietly. Too much movement might draw attention, and attention is rarely good news here. You might be in a city domus, a wealthy Roman-esque townhouse, or out in the countryside on a sprawling villa, surrounded by vineyards or olive trees. Either way, the work starts now. If you're a household slave, congratulations. You get to polish marble floors until they reflect your existential dread. If you're a farm slave, hope you like blisters, because the plow waits for no one. And if you're one of the unlucky ones in the mines, well, you probably won't be watching this video for long. Yeah, it's that kind of history episode. Now imagine carrying a silver platter the size of a pizza box. Except instead of pepperoni, it's covered with exotic meats and questionable seafood. Your master reclines on a couch, toga artfully arranged, complaining that the oysters aren't fresh enough. You're standing there thinking, "Sir, they were caught 2 days ago, 300 kilometers away. You're lucky they didn't walk here." But you smile, always smile. Because a wrong expression could mean anything from a slap to worse. Still, not every master was cruel. Some treated their slaves as part of the household, gave them education, responsibilities, even a chance at freedom one day. Others, let's just say Roman law called slaves tools that talk. Yeah, tools. Like a hammer, but with feelings. Still, not every master was cruel. Some treated their slaves as part of the household, gave them education, responsibilities, even a chance at freedom one day. Others, let's just say Roman law called slaves tools that talk. Yeah, tools, like a hammer, but with feelings. By midday, the Roman sun turns the city into a brick oven. You're sweating through your tunic, or what's left of it, and the smell of olive oil, garbage, and humanity fills the air. You run errands, fetching water from the fountain, cleaning the atrium, chasing your master's pet monkey. Yes, they had those. Or escorting the lady of the house to the baths. Speaking of the baths, imagine a luxurious spa, but you're not there to relax. You're there to scrub someone else's back while they gossip about who is divorcing who. And if you're a child slave, maybe you're carrying messages, fanning the guests, or learning to read, not for your benefit, of course, but so you can better serve someone who is. Ah yes, literacy, the gift that keeps on giving to your master. Let's talk about hope. Because even in this brutal system, there was a glimmer of it. Some slaves could buy their freedom or be freed for loyal service. Once freed, they became liberti, freed men. They could own property, run businesses, even get rich. But here's the catch. They still owed lifelong loyalty to their former master. It's like getting fired, but still having to write Christmas cards to your old boss. Still, some made it. Famous ones even, like Tiro, Cicero's secretary, who was so smart his notes basically helped preserve Roman philosophy. Not bad for someone born into chains. Night comes slowly, draping the city in torchlight and fatigue. You've survived another day. If you're lucky, you eat leftovers, barley porridge, bread, maybe olives if the gods like you today. Then it's back to your sleeping corner, your aching body pressed into straw, your mind replaying every mistake you didn't make today. You hear laughter from the triclinium, your masters feasting, drinking, living. You close your eyes and dream, not of wealth, not even of freedom, just of one day where no one shouts your name. If you're lucky, you eat leftovers, barley porridge, bread, maybe olives if the gods like you today. Then it's back to your sleeping corner, your aching body pressed into straw, your mind replaying every mistake you didn't make today. You hear laughter from the triclinium, your masters feasting, drinking, living. You close your eyes and dream, not of wealth, not even of freedom, just of one day where no one shouts your name. Imagine yourself drifting through time. The modern world fades behind you. The electric hum of machines, the glow of your screen, the quiet ticking of the clock. In its place, another rhythm emerges. The slow creak of a wooden cart, the soft slap of sandals on cobblestone, the distant call of a street vendor selling figs beneath the morning sun. You have arrived in Rome. The air is warm, touched with the scent of olive oil and wet stone. The city is waking. Bakers are stoking their ovens. The first rays of light spill across tiled roofs, and smoke curls lazily into the sky. Somewhere, a fountain trickles softly, water that once flowed from the great aqueducts built by hands that were not free. Because beneath the glory of marble temples and golden statues, beneath the power of emperors and senators, there existed another Rome, quieter, unseen, yet essential. It was the Rome of the slaves. Their lives built the empire's foundations, stone by stone, stitch by stitch, meal by meal. And though history rarely recorded their names, their footsteps were everywhere. In the kitchens of patricians, on the fields of distant estates, and even in the dark corridors beneath the arenas. Tonight, we'll walk with them, slowly, quietly. We'll trace the rhythms of their days, their work, their meals, their rest, their hopes. So, settle in. Let the noise of the present drift away. Let the sounds of ancient Rome take its place, a city alive with whispers, work, and the gentle sigh of time itself. Imagine the faint blue light of early morning spilling through a narrow courtyard. The air is cool, damp with the scent of stone and ashes from the hearth. The household still sleeps, but in the shadows, movement stirs. You can hear it, the soft rustle of linen, the shuffle of bare feet against mosaic floors, the quiet clink of metal as a chain or ring brushes against a wrist. A household slave rises. Her name perhaps is Livia, though it may have been given to her by her master, chosen for convenience rather than meaning. She moves silently to the kitchen. The embers from the night before are coaxed back to life. She blows gently on the coals until they glow, then feeds them with dry twigs and olive branches. Soon, the scent of smoke and baking bread fills the air, the day's first offering to the waking house. Elsewhere, another slave, perhaps a young man named Dama, sweeps the peristyle courtyard, brushing away fallen petals and dust. His movements are careful, rhythmic. He has done this every morning for years. Each motion blends into the next until it feels almost meditative, like breathing. In the Roman domus, or townhouse, slaves filled every corner of daily life. There were the camerari who tended to the bedrooms, the cochi who cooked the meals, the ostiari who guarded the front door. Some cared for children, some managed finances, some even oversaw other slaves. Their work began before the sun rose, and it often ended long after it set. The soundscape of their world was a quiet symphony of repetition. The creak of a bucket drawn from a well, the steady scraping of bronze across marble, the murmur of water being poured into clay basins. If you listen closely, you might hear the distant laughter of free citizens drifting in from the street, a reminder of a world just out of reach. Yet not all was constant toil. There were moments, small and fragile, when even a slave might pause. Perhaps in the brief stillness before the master awoke, standing by the kitchen hearth, warming cold hands, or when polishing a silver cup, catching a reflection of one's own tired eyes and thinking, if only for a heartbeat, of a home long lost. As the sun climbs higher, the household stirs. Footsteps echo through marble halls. Voices rise, orders are given, tasks assigned. Livia carries trays of food, bread, cheese, olives, and wine diluted with water. Dharma follows with pitchers and cups. They move in practiced silence. In Rome, a good servant was one who seemed invisible, seen only in the moment of need. The masters eat while reclining, speaking idly of politics or theatre. A senator complains about the price of grain. Another mentions rumors from the forum. Livia stands by, waiting, her eyes fixed somewhere beyond the horizon of their conversation. If a mistake is made, a spilled drink, a dish forgotten, punishment might follow. Sometimes it was a harsh word, a slap or worse. But often it was simply the weight of invisibility, the quiet knowing that no one saw you, that your labor was expected but your existence was not acknowledged. Still, some slaves found meaning in small victories, a job done well, a moment of rest, a rare smile from a kinder master. In the afternoon, the household grows quiet again. The heat presses down. The air feels heavy, thick with the scent of oil and dust. Slaves move through shaded corridors, tending to laundry or mending garments. The clatter of amphorae in the storage room mixes with the soft hum of flies near the window. Outside, in the city streets, other slaves labor under the open sun, unloading ships at the harbor, carrying water, sweeping the marble steps of temples. Their backs glisten with sweat. Their eyes squint against the glare of day. Some sing to keep rhythm as they work. Old songs from faraway homelands, their melodies blending into the hum of the city. Few passers-by notice. But in those quiet songs, something human endures, a thread of memory that time itself cannot quite erase. As evening descends, the household slows. Lamps are lit, casting long, soft shadows across the floor. Livia returns to the kitchen, preparing the final meal of the day. The scent of herbs, thyme, bay, rosemary, fills the air. Later, when the masters have eaten and retired, the slaves gather in a small side room. They eat their own meal, simple bread, porridge, maybe a few olives left over. Conversation is muted. Laughter, when it comes, is quiet but real. And when the fire dies low, one by one they lie down on straw mats or wooden benches. Outside, the city of Rome hums softly in the distance, carts rolling home, dogs barking, the faint call of a night watchman. Tomorrow will come again. The same motions, the same silence, the same invisible rhythm of labor. And yet, in that repetition lies a strange kind of peace. Because even within the walls of servitude, there was routine, there was familiarity, there was life. Not all slaves in Rome lived and died in silence. Some left behind fragments of their thoughts, pieces of memory that survived the centuries. One of those voices belongs to a man named Epictetus. You might have heard of him as a philosopher, one whose words shaped Stoicism and echoed through the ages. But before he became a teacher of wisdom, he was a slave. Imagine a modest Roman household, not far from the heart of the city. The smell of burning olive oil hangs in the air. A young boy, thin and quiet, moves carefully across the tiled floor, carrying a jug of water. His name is Epictetus. He was born in Hierapolis, in what is now modern-day Turkey, far from Rome, and sold into slavery while still young. His master was Epaphroditus, a wealthy freedman who served in the court of Emperor Nero. It was a household filled with whispers, political intrigue, paranoia, and the ever-present tension of imperial life. For a slave, this was a dangerous environment. A misplaced word, a wrong expression, even a glance could end a life. Yet, Epictetus observed. He listened, and somewhere in that silence, he began to think. He watched the free men of Rome, senators, scholars, and soldiers, and saw that despite their wealth and power, they were often miserable. They feared losing what they had and were enslaved by their own desires. He once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." That thought, simple, calm, and revolutionary, became the foundation of his philosophy. Life as a slave offered Epictetus few comforts. His work likely involved errands, small administrative tasks, perhaps assisting in the complex social duties of his master's household. He lived under constant control, his fate in the hands of another man. And yet, even within that confinement, he discovered a strange kind of freedom, the freedom of the mind. When asked about pain, he reportedly said, "It is not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of things." In other words, suffering in its purest form begins not in the body but in thought, and that, he believed, could be mastered. Eventually, Epictetus gained his freedom. We don't know exactly how, perhaps through manumission, perhaps through the death of his master. But he did not seek wealth or comfort afterward. Instead, he turned to teaching. He opened a small philosophical school in Nicomedia and later in Nicopolis in Greece. His students came from across the empire, senators, soldiers, and common men alike, drawn by his quiet wisdom and his unshakable calm. He owned little. He lived simply. And though his own writings have not survived, his student Arian preserved his words in what we now know as the Discourses and the Enchiridion. In these teachings, we glimpse not only the thoughts of a philosopher, but the inner life of a man who once served, obeyed, and endured. He reminded his listeners that the world cannot be controlled, only the self. That one should meet hardship with composure. That freedom is not given, it is cultivated. Imagine him sitting quietly, perhaps near a small window open to the evening air. A lamp flickers beside him. The sound of waves drifts in from the distance. He speaks slowly, deliberately, his voice calm and steady. When something happens, the only thing in your power is your response. You may not control the storm, but you can control how you face it. For the men and women of Rome, especially those who lived in bondage or uncertainty, these words carried weight. They offered not escape, but acceptance, not rebellion, but resilience. Epictetus did not call for overthrowing the system of slavery. He simply taught that the human spirit could remain untouched, even when the body was not free. It is a difficult lesson, one that walks a fine line between peace and surrender. Yet perhaps for those who had nothing else, it was a kind of mercy. As centuries passed, his words traveled far beyond the walls of his small school. They were read by emperors, warriors, monks, and even modern thinkers. But it is worth remembering the calm, disciplined wisdom of Stoicism. The philosophy that taught endurance, balance, and serenity was once shaped by the mind of a man born into slavery. In his quiet defiance, there is a strange poetry. The empire that built its greatness on the backs of the enslaved would one day be taught virtue by one of them. The life of Epictetus reminds us that even in the harshest circumstances, there exists a space untouched by power, the inner world. It cannot be bought or sold, chained or silenced. And so, as night deepens over Rome, imagine that small lamp still glowing, its flame steady, patient, and calm. A symbol of quiet endurance in a world that often forgot such things. Pause, the sound of a night breeze through olive trees. Let us now drift further, away from the philosopher's study, out into the wider world of Rome, to uncover the mysteries of how the enslaved lived, worked, and were remembered in its vast history. If you were to walk through the ruins of ancient Rome today, you might see marble columns, broken statues, and grand arches standing against the pale sky. Tourists wander with cameras, marveling at the remains of emperors and gods. But beneath those stones, beneath the layers of history polished by centuries, lie traces of other lives, lives rarely written about, lives that once filled the silence between the monuments. The slaves of Rome left few inscriptions, few names carved in marble, but archaeology has begun to whisper their stories again. A city frozen in time, buried in volcanic ash in 79 CE. When the eruption of Mount Vesuvius covered the town, it also preserved the smallest details of daily life. Wooden doors, fruit bowls, graffiti on walls, and the faint echoes of the people who once lived there. In the remains of the grand house of the Menander, archaeologists discovered cramped quarters hidden behind the kitchen, a windowless room, no more than a few paces wide, where a single narrow bed had stood. On the walls were faint marks, scratches, perhaps from tools or storage jars. It was a service's cubiculum, the sleeping place of a slave. Imagine that small room, the air still heavy with the scent of smoke and olive oil, the sound of footsteps above, the faint rhythm of labor that never truly stopped. Through evidence like this, we see the physical boundaries of servitude, the separation between grandeur and invisibility, between the atrium with its polished mosaics and the silent corners where the enslaved rested. Sometimes a name survived, carved on a lamp, etched on pottery. Names like Eros, Felix, Amphion. Names that often carried irony. Love, lucky, singer. Perhaps gifts from masters, perhaps chosen names of defiance, small acts of self-definition in a world that denied identity. Another site, Cumae near Naples. Here, in the remains of a vast villa, archaeologists found a lead tag. Small, corroded, but legible. It bore the words, "Hold me, I am runaway property." This was a slave identification tag. Such tags were sometimes hung around the necks of enslaved people who had once tried to flee, an ancient precursor to a dog tag carrying their master's name and address. It is a haunting artifact, the tangible weight of ownership. Yet even this small object tells a deeper story, that some slaves did run despite the danger. Despite the laws that branded fugitives as criminals, despite the risk of beating or death. The tag is a symbol of control, yes, but also of resistance, of a will that refused to surrender entirely. In the vast countryside outside Rome, the latifundia, great agricultural estates that fed the empire, traces of slave labor remain in the soil itself. In aerial photographs, you can still see the faint grid lines of ancient fields. Beneath those fields, skeletal remains reveal signs of repetitive strain, malnutrition, and hard labor. Bones twisted by years of burden. The work was endless. Planting, harvesting, pressing olives, tending animals, mining stone. Many of these laborers were ergastuli slaves, kept in stone barracks, locked at night, released by day. Their lives left little record beyond the scars in the earth. When excavations uncovered one such site, archaeologists found broken chains and iron collars among the debris. Yet beside them also, clay figurines of gods, worn smooth from touch. Perhaps they prayed in those brief moments before sleep, to Mercury for swiftness, to Fortuna for luck, to some quiet household spirit for mercy. Faith for many was a small refuge. The shrines they tended were modest, a few pebbles arranged around an oil lamp. But they spoke of hope, the kind that survives even in the narrowest spaces. The cultural tapestry of Rome was complex, and within it, slavery wove invisible threads that touched every part of life. In the baths, slaves carried towels and oils, waiting silently as their masters bathed. In the theaters, slaves worked backstage, adjusting masks and props. In temples, they cleaned altars, tended fires and cared for sacred animals. And in tombs, their presence was sometimes acknowledged in ways that reveal both cruelty and tenderness. In a burial inscription from Ostia, a man named Tiro, once a slave, was honored by his former master's family for his loyal service and gentle nature. The words are carved in stone, a quiet gesture of remembrance in a society where most were forgotten. Nearby, another epitaph reads, "To Philomusus, slave and musician, who brought laughter and song to his master's house." It is brief, but touching. And though written by someone else's hand, it reminds us that even the most invisible lives leave ripples behind. Every artifact, every inscription, every cramped room tells us that the enslaved were not merely property. They were people who loved, suffered, created, prayed, and endured. Some were born into bondage, others were captured in war, sold across seas, and some, in time, were freed, becoming liberty, the freedmen who carried with them both gratitude and the shadow of their former chains. The archaeologist's brush reveals more than dust and stone. It reveals presence, the quiet, persistent trace of humanity beneath an empire's grandeur. When you walk the Roman Forum today, imagine the thousands of unseen hands that once laid those stones. Hands that built arches they would never walk under as equals. Hands that swept marble floors but never sat upon the couches within. Their fingerprints remain, not in the records of emperors, but in the rhythm of the world they sustained. Archaeology can never tell us everything. There are limits to what stone remembers. But in the careful silence of excavation, in the quiet brushing away of centuries, we come as close as possible to hearing the whispers of those long gone. The whispers of the invisible, the true heartbeat of Rome. Pause. The ambient sound shifts, the soft hum of night crickets, the flicker of torchlight. Let us now leave the world of buried rooms and broken chains. Let us turn our gaze upward, toward the other side of Roman life, the masters, the wealthy, the elite, those whose comfort depended upon the toil of others and whose luxury rested on invisible backs. For only by understanding both can we see the full shape of Rome, not only its power, but its price. By now, you have walked through the kitchens, the fields, and the narrow sleeping chambers of Rome's slaves. You have heard their quiet labor, their whispered hopes, and their traces buried beneath stone. Now imagine turning a corner, stepping from the dim, smoky quarters of the servants into a sunlit atrium of marble and gold. The air feels cooler here, perfumed with myrrh and rose oil. The floor gleams beneath your feet, and above, a skylight opens to a perfect square of blue. You are in the world of the masters, the dominus and domina, the ruling class of Rome. Their lives were built upon the same rhythm of work and routine, but their days unfolded in a very different light. While slaves rose before dawn to labor, the masters often began their mornings with leisure. Picture a noble Roman reclining on a couch, attended by servants who bring basins of scented water and fine linen cloths. A young boy adjusts his sandals. Another fetches a mirror polished to a bronze gleam. Breakfast is simple: bread, fruit, and honey, served by careful hands. Nearby, a scribe waits with a wax tablet, ready to read letters or take dictation. For the Roman elite, even the smallest task, lighting a lamp, brushing dust from a toga, folding a garment, was often done by someone else. A well-to-do household might own dozens, even hundreds of slaves. A few of the wealthiest families counted them in the thousands, each one assigned to a role: cooks, bath attendants, scribes, litter bearers, hairdressers, guards, tutors, secretaries, and stable hands. It was a society in which labor was invisible by design, a mark of privilege to do nothing for oneself. The relationship between master and slave was complex, woven from dominance, dependence, cruelty, and sometimes affection. Many masters saw themselves as benevolent, believing they provided food, shelter, and discipline in return for service. Some prided themselves on kindness, others on fear. Roman writers often discussed this dynamic, how a master should treat his slaves. The philosopher Seneca, himself a wealthy man, once wrote, "They are slaves, yes, but they are also men. Treat them as you would wish to be treated. Were fortune to reverse your places." It was a rare note of compassion, though one more philosophical than revolutionary. Others were far less gentle. The historian Cato the Elder advised landowners to work their slaves relentlessly, to sell them when old, and to show no mercy to the idle. For him, a slave was a tool, like an ox or a plough, to be used efficiently. And so the treatment of slaves varied widely, not by law, but by temperament. A kind master could make servitude bearable, a cruel one could make it a slow torment. In the afternoon, the domina, the lady of the house, might spend her hours in the company of her maidservants, directing them in their work. One combs her hair into intricate braids, another brings perfumes from Alexandria sealed in small glass jars. She might instruct one to embroider a new garment, another to read poetry aloud as she rests. For these women, luxury was inseparable from dependence. Their comfort existed only because others remained unseen. Even their beauty, their hair, their jewelry, their silken robes, was a performance maintained by the hands of slaves. In this quiet contrast lies a truth about Rome, that the splendor of the few depended upon the silence of the many. As the day turns to evening, imagine a grand banquet, a convivium, the height of Roman sociability. Oil lamps flicker against marble walls. The air hums with music and murmured laughter. Guests recline on couches arranged around a low table, their fingers glistening with olive oil and wine. They dine on delicacies, roasted peacock, oysters from Baiae, figs soaked in honey. Behind them, slaves move silently, refilling cups, carrying platters, wiping spills before they touch the floor. Every gesture is choreographed, the servants trained to anticipate needs before they are spoken. A raised hand, a look, a pause in conversation, all signal command. To serve in such banquets was a mixture of precision and invisibility. The slaves were present in every moment, yet never acknowledged as individuals. Some guests might idly discuss philosophy or politics, perhaps even the writings of Epictetus or Seneca, while the living embodiments of their subject matter stood at their side, pouring wine. It is a small irony of history, the free debating the nature of virtue, while the unfree carried their words on silver trays. Beyond the house and the city walls, in the villas of the countryside, the contrast was even starker. The Roman elite would retreat from the bustle of Rome to their estates in Campania or Etruria, vast lands worked by hundreds of enslaved laborers. There, the masters strolled through colonnaded gardens, writing poetry about peace and leisure, while in the fields below, men and women bent under the weight of grain sacks. To the poets, this was the life of harmony, the otium, the ideal of cultivated rest. But that tranquility rested on an invisible rhythm of toil that never ceased. The crack of a whip was seldom heard in marble courtyards, yet it echoed faintly in the distance, a reminder of where comfort truly came from. Still, not all masters were blind. Some freed their slaves, rewarding loyalty or service. Manumission, the act of granting freedom, was both a social and spiritual ritual. A freed slave became a libertus, and though still tied to his former master by duty, he gained legal rights and dignity. Many freedmen prospered, opening businesses, running shops, even acquiring wealth of their own. But the line was never fully erased. Freedom in Rome carried memory, the lingering awareness of chains once worn. A freedman might walk proudly through the forum, dressed in fine clothes, yet still hear whispers behind him, reminders that though the body was free, the past never quite released its hold. And so, as the lamps burn low in the master's house, the rhythms of both worlds merge once more. In one room, laughter fades into drunken sleep. In another, quiet footsteps carry trays away, clean the floors, extinguish the flames. Somewhere in the shadows, a slave finally rests, only for a few short hours before dawn returns. Above them all, the city of Rome sleeps, grand, restless, and eternal. A city built upon contrasts between freedom and servitude, wealth and want, light and shadow. The masters dreamed of triumphs, of marble, of empire. The slaves dreamed, perhaps, of nothing, or of a morning that would come without orders, without chains, without fear. Soft music returns, a slow flute melody, distant and wistful. History remembers the names of emperors and generals, Augustus, Trajan, Hadrian, but beneath those names lies the silent majority who carried Rome upon their backs. Their stories, faint but enduring, are the hidden heartbeat of the empire. As the night deepens, the marble fades to shadow, and the sound of the lyre fades into silence. Imagine standing there, between the two worlds. One of luxury, one of labor. And in that stillness, you can almost hear the truth of it. The empire that conquered the world was itself built upon quiet endurance. And now, the city sleeps. The marble domes fade into silver under the moonlight. The streets are empty, their stones still warm from the day's sun. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then falls silent. The great empire of Rome, that unending hum of life and power, exhales, and for a moment everything is still. We have walked through that stillness tonight, through the rhythm of unseen hands and the quiet endurance of countless lives. The story of Roman slavery is not one of glory nor triumph. It is the story of labor, constant, repetitive, anonymous, yet deeply human. It is the breath beneath the marble, the heartbeat beneath the empire's crown. Imagine again the house of the master. Its lamps have long been extinguished. The air smells faintly of oil and smoke. In the servants' quarters, someone stirs in their sleep, a dream perhaps of home or of nothing at all. The soft rhythm of breathing fills the darkness. Beyond the city walls, the fields are silent now too. The tools are set aside, the animals resting. The same moon that shines on palaces also shines upon the barns, the slave quarters, the lonely roads that lead nowhere. And in that shared light, all distinctions blur. Master and servant, citizen and captive, for a brief moment in the hush of night, they are equal. All of them part of the same fragile world, fleeting, mortal, human. Over centuries, the empire that once seemed eternal slowly faded. The statues cracked, the aqueducts broke, and the villas fell to ruin. The language changed, the gods were forgotten, and the marble was stolen and reused to build new worlds. But beneath every layer of history, something remains. A whisper of the lives that built it. Archaeologists brush away the soil and uncover traces. A shard of pottery with a name scratched in haste. A small lamp that once lit a servant's path. A rusted key to a door that no longer exists. These are the quiet memorials of ordinary people. The ones who lived without inscription, who worked without reward. And though history forgot their voices, the stones still remember the weight of their footsteps. There is something deeply peaceful about this kind of remembrance. The calm of knowing that even the smallest life becomes part of the vast fabric of time. Every empire rises and falls. Every master grows old. Every servant one day finds rest. And what remains are not names nor triumphs, but echoes, soft, enduring, and patient as sleep. Perhaps that is the truest kind of immortality. Not the preservation of power, but the quiet persistence of memory. Freedom, a simple word. Light as air, easy to say, yet heavy with meaning. To the Romans, it was libertas, a sacred idea, etched deep into their political language, their laws, their monuments. But for millions who lived under bondage, that word existed like a mirage, shimmering on the horizon, distant, almost unreal. In this final, quiet chapter of our journey, we drift from the crowded kitchens and dim workshops of Rome to a more elusive realm, the world of freedmen and freedwomen, those who once were slaves and who stepped, however tentatively, into the uncertain space called freedom. Imagine it is a warm morning in Rome. The air carries the scent of olive oil and dust, mingling with the soft chatter of the crowd. A slave, weary but neatly dressed, kneels before his master in a marble hall. Nearby stands a magistrate, draped in his toga. In his hand, a staff, the vindicta, a simple rod that would mark the passage from bondage to liberty. The ritual begins quietly. The master declares before witnesses, "I wish this man to be free." The magistrate touches the slave's shoulder with the staff, a symbolic gesture, light as breath. And with that touch, the man ceases to be property. He becomes, in Roman eyes, a libertus, a freedman. The moment is brief, almost understated. There are no drums, no tears, no wild celebration, just words and silence. But in that silence, the world shifts. For the newly freed, everything changes. And yet, nothing changes completely. To be freed in Rome did not mean full independence. Freedom, like everything in Roman society, existed in layers, ranked, defined, and controlled. The former master became the patron, and the freedman his client. Gratitude was expected, as was service. The freedman might still work for his old master, manage his shop, or tutor his children. He might even continue to live under the same roof, in the same modest room where he once slept as a slave. In return, the patron offered protection, a promise of support in the courts, of food in hard times, of a place within the web of Roman society. Freedom, then, was not a clean break, but a negotiation, a delicate balance between duty and dignity. Still, it was better than bondage. A freedman could own property, marry legally, and raise children who would be born free. That simple fact, that your child would not belong to another, was a quiet revolution. Imagine the feeling of waking up the day after manumission, realizing that you can walk through the streets of Rome, not as a possession, but as a person. Your shadow on the ground is finally your own. History, as it often does, remembers the powerful. Yet the world of freed slaves in Rome was vast and surprisingly visible. Some rose to great success, managing businesses, trading across seas, or serving in the imperial household. Others remained in modest obscurity, living quiet lives on the edge of society, neither fully accepted nor entirely shunned. One such freedman was Tiro, the devoted secretary of Cicero. Once a slave, he became indispensable to the great orator, organizing his correspondence, taking notes, recording speeches in the shorthand he himself invented. When Cicero granted him freedom, Tiro did not vanish into anonymity. He continued to serve, but as a free man, and lived long after his master's death, preserving Cicero's legacy for centuries to come. His story, like so many others, blurs the line between servitude and loyalty, dependence and respect. As Rome's empire expanded, so too did the population of freed people. They became an entire social class, an in-between layer in the intricate pyramid of Roman hierarchy. They were not slaves, yet not entirely citizens. They were not nobles, yet not without influence. A freedman could never hold the highest offices of state, but his children, born free, could. In this way, Rome's system was both rigid and flexible, cruel, yet oddly pragmatic. Freedmen became craftsmen, teachers, merchants, accountants, and sometimes priests. They could amass wealth, own homes, even own slaves themselves, a fact that, while paradoxical, was common. It was as if freedom, once tasted, made them cling to every means of securing it, even if that meant perpetuating the system that had once bound them. Freedom, to them, was not an abstract ideal. It was food, shelter, safety. It was the right to decide when to wake, what to wear, where to go. Small things, but precious. And yet, behind that fragile dignity lingered a quiet unease. Roman society never truly forgot one's origins. A freedman bore the mark of servitude forever. His speech, his manners, his scars, all whispered his past. His name, too, betrayed him. Roman custom required freedmen to take the family name of their former master. Thus, their identity was always doubled, half their own, half borrowed. Even in death, the inscriptions on their tombs often echoed gratitude or dependence to my patron who gave me freedom, to the gods and to the one who made me a man. Freedom came, but never quite without shadow. For women, the path to freedom was narrower still. A freedwoman or libertar often depended entirely on the will of her master, whether he granted her liberty and under what conditions. Many remained tied to the households they had served, becoming companions, caretakers, or even unofficial wives. Yet others carved quiet independence through work, running small shops, weaving or managing taverns. In the bustling Roman marketplaces, one could sometimes hear their voices, bargaining, laughing, commanding prices. Their world was small but alive with motion, their freedom fragile yet fiercely guarded. Roman law, always meticulous, defined every stage of liberty. A freedman could never become a senator, nor could he hold military command. But he could vote, he could marry, and he could accumulate wealth. There were even degrees of freedom, cives Romani, those granted full citizenship. Latini Juniani, a lesser class, half citizen, half free, and those freed informally without ceremony, dediticii, who remained outsiders. Freedom in Rome was not a right but a privilege, one that could be given, regulated, or revoked. It was, like everything else in that empire, carefully measured. To the philosophers of the day, liberty meant more than just legal status. For Seneca, freedom was a state of the soul. A man might be in chains, yet free in spirit, if he mastered his desires and accepted fate. To Epictetus, himself once a slave, freedom was inner peace, a harmony untouched by circumstance. Perhaps that is what made Roman freedom so layered. It existed both as a civic condition and as a private inward journey. Even those who could never escape their chains could dream of that serene independence within. The paradox of Rome was this: the civilization that celebrated liberty as its founding virtue was built upon the labor of the unfree. The Roman citizen prided himself on his independence, his right to vote, to speak, to own. Yet all of that rested upon the toil of others. The word libertas was carved into temples, shouted in the forum, used to rally armies. But for most people living under Roman rule, liberty was not a lived reality, only a distant light. Even freedmen, grateful for their modest place in society, existed as constant reminders of the empire's contradictions, the coexistence of progress and oppression, of philosophy and inequality. And yet, in the small acts of daily life, freed people found meaning. They built tombs to commemorate their families. They commissioned modest statues, sometimes depicting themselves in fine clothing, holding scrolls or tools, symbols of knowledge, of honest work. Each monument whispered the same message: I existed, I endured, I became free. Their lives, though humble, carried the quiet dignity of survival, the triumph of identity reclaimed. Freedom in ancient Rome was not the sweeping romantic ideal it would later become. It was fragile, conditional, imperfect. Yet, for those who had known slavery, it was everything. It was the space to breathe without permission, the right to speak one's own name. The simple joy of walking through the city at dawn, when the marble glowed pale gold and the air smelled of baking bread. Perhaps, in those early morning hours, the freedman felt something like peace. The city was alive with possibility, the world just large enough to contain his small, hard-won freedom. Centuries later, the empire fell. Its chains rusted, its hierarchies faded. But the idea of freedom, fragile, contested, deeply human, endured. From the words of philosophers to the laws of later nations, from the struggles of the enslaved to the dreams of the oppressed, that Roman paradox lived on. Every civilization since has wrestled with the same question: what does it mean to be free? Perhaps it is not the absence of chains, but the quiet knowledge that one's life belongs only to oneself. So as the last lamps of Rome flicker and fade, imagine again the figure of the freedman walking home through the sleeping city. His steps are light. The street is empty. Above him, the stars shimmer faintly over the roofs of the eternal city. He carries no title, no wealth, no legacy, only the fragile, priceless dream of freedom. And in that dream, the whole empire breathes for just a moment as one. And time is the gentlest sculptor. It smooths the edges of history, softens its noise, and leaves behind only the quiet forms of what once was. Empires rise, crumble, and vanish, yet their patterns endure, like faint impressions left on wet clay. So it is with Rome. The Roman Empire, though long gone, never truly disappeared. Its language whispers through our words, its laws echo through our courts, and its ideas, even those born from its darkest practices, linger, like the memory of a dream that never entirely fades. And among those lingering echoes is the legacy of slavery, reshaped, disguised, but never wholly erased. When we think of Rome, we often picture marble columns, paved roads, and shining cities. But beneath that surface was a vast, unseen machine of labor. Every aqueduct, every bathhouse, every amphitheater, all were the work of countless hands. Slaves quarried the stone, mixed the mortar, hauled the blocks, and polished the surfaces until they gleamed. The Roman ideal of leisure, of cultured ease, was possible only because others worked without rest. That rhythm of wealth built upon unseen toil did not end with Rome. It continued subtly into the fabric of later civilizations. The estates of medieval lords, the plantations of distant colonies, the factories of early industry. In each, the same quiet principle endured, that prosperity often rests upon the labor of those who have no voice. It is an uncomfortable truth, but history seldom offers comfort. It offers patterns and patience. One of Rome's most enduring gifts to the world was its legal mind. Even today, echoes of Roman law shape modern jurisprudence in Europe, in the Americas, in almost every nation touched by Western civilization. But embedded within those ancient codes were also the definitions of property, personhood, and freedom. The Institutes of Justinian, written centuries after the Republic's fall, still preserved laws that defined slaves as res things, a person, legally alive, yet owned. Later societies inherited this logic, sometimes without realizing it. When European colonial empires justified the enslavement of others, they drew, however distantly, upon Roman precedent. The words changed, the forms evolved, but the conceptual seed was ancient. Freedom and ownership, liberty and law, these were Roman words, Roman frameworks. They shaped how later generations understood power itself. Even now, when we speak of civil rights or citizenship, we echo Rome's dual obsession, the privileges of belonging and the boundaries that exclude. Walk through any old European city and you may notice something strangely familiar. The arches, the columns, the forums reborn as plazas. These are not mere stylistic echoes. They are cultural imprints, physical embodiments of Rome's worldview. The Roman city was a map of hierarchy. The patrician villa crowned the hill, overlooking the clustered tenements below. The slave quarters lay in the shadow of wealth, close enough to serve, far enough to remain invisible. Later centuries repeated the same design, the manor above the fields, the palace above the town, the owner above the worker. Architecture became ideology carved into stone. Even today, in cities built long after Rome's fall, one can still sense the same unspoken structure, the invisible layers of power shaped long ago by the geometry of empire. In Rome, manual work was seen as necessary but ignoble. A Roman citizen might farm or fight, but to labor with one's hands, especially in service to another, was deemed servile. This ancient attitude trickled quietly through time. In medieval Europe, the nobility lived by land and sword, not by labor. In the Enlightenment, intellectual and administrative work was exalted, while manual labor remained undervalued. Even now, that faint whisper survives in the way societies divide work into higher and lower, white collar and blue collar. The Romans, without intending it, bequeathed us not just laws and architecture, but also the psychology of hierarchy. The quiet assumption that dignity follows status. Yet paradoxically, it was the labor of the lowly that sustained the greatness of their world. Without the slave, the citizen could not live as he did. It is a truth as old as civilization, and perhaps as persistent as humanity itself. The concept of freedom, libertas, survived Rome's fall and transformed through centuries. What began as the right of a Roman citizen became, in time, the aspiration of all peoples. In medieval charters, in the writings of philosophers, in revolutions and constitutions, the idea of freedom evolved, but its roots remained tangled with Rome's. To be free, in Roman terms, was not simply to live without chains. It was to belong to a city, a class, a law. To be free meant to have status. It would take centuries before the world began to imagine freedom as universal, belonging to all, not just to some. Even then, the shadow of Roman exclusivity lingered. When empires rose in the modern age, they often spoke the language of civilization, progress, and law. But beneath it, the ancient hierarchy whispered still. The Christian world, too, inherited Rome's structures and transformed them. The early church grew in the shadow of the empire, using its language, its organization, its legal forms. And while the faith proclaimed spiritual equality, it often accepted the social reality of slavery. The Apostle Paul, himself a Roman citizen, urged slaves to obey their masters, not because bondage was just, but because it was the world as it was. Over time, Christian thinkers reinterpreted servitude in moral and allegorical ways, as a metaphor for sin, for duty, for faith. Freedom became inward, spiritual, echoing Stoic thought, yet colored by divine hope. In monasteries and cathedrals, the words of Rome were reworked into prayers. The empire became the church, and the slaves became souls. But the pattern of obedience, service, and redemption remained. Thus, Rome's legacy did not vanish. It was baptized, softened, moralized, and passed on. Centuries later, as European powers crossed oceans and built new empires, they carried with them more than ships and steel. They carried ideas of law, order, property, and civilization, all born from Rome. And in the plantations of the Caribbean, in the mines of the New World, in the households of colonizers, the ancient rhythm returned. A small few ruling over the labor of the many, the justifications changed, now couched in race, religion, or economy, but the structure remained hauntingly familiar. Rome had written the first draft of that script. The world, for centuries, simply kept reading from it. It took revolutions, wars, and generations of struggle to begin unwriting that legacy. And even now, echoes of it remain. In inequality, in labor exploitation, in the subtle hierarchies that still shape modern life. In art and literature, the Roman slave became both symbol and shadow. In Renaissance paintings, they appear in the background, carrying trays, holding torches, steadying marble busts. In neoclassical sculpture, they re-emerge as allegories of submission or toil, their forms idealized but voiceless. Even as Europe rediscovered the beauty of Rome, it also inherited its silence, the quiet absence of those who built the world but never spoke. Only in later centuries did writers and historians begin to imagine their voices, to ask not what Rome looked like from its marble balconies, but from the kitchens below. That shift, slow, tender, incomplete, marks perhaps our most humane inheritance. The willingness to remember not only the powerful, but the powerless. Rome's story is not just the rise of empire, but the fragility of greatness, the very structure that sustained it, the dependence on others' labor, also weakened it. When the economy faltered, when wars consumed manpower, when the enslaved population dwindled, the system strained. Without constant conquest, there were no new slaves. Without new slaves, the engines of luxury slowed. Rome's collapse in part was the quiet revenge of its own foundations. And so, its ruins whisper a kind of moral symmetry. What is built upon subjugation cannot last forever. Even marble, given time, returns to dust. Yet amid all these shadows, there is something enduringly human, a thread of empathy that stretches from the Roman world to ours. Every generation, in its own way, rediscovers what it means to be free, to labor, to belong. The conditions change, the forms evolve, but the longing remains the same: to be seen, to rest, to call one's life one's own. Perhaps that is the truest legacy of Rome. Not its buildings, nor its armies, nor even its laws, but its unending mirror, reflecting both our progress and our flaws. It reminds us that civilization is not measured by monuments, but by mercy. Not by power, but by compassion. Imagine standing now in the ruins of the Forum under a silver moon. The columns rise like pale ribs against the sky. The stones are cool beneath your hand. All around, the silence of centuries presses close. Once these streets roared with voices, merchants, magistrates, slaves. Now only the wind speaks, carrying faint echoes of what once was. Somewhere beneath your feet lie the traces of houses, shops, and workshops layered in the earth, and deeper still, perhaps, the bones of those who toiled unseen. The city sleeps, but its memory remains, woven quietly into the world we know. So, as the night deepens and the sounds fade, consider this. Every civilization carries within it the memory of those who served it. Every freedom we enjoy is built in some way upon the labor of others, known or unknown. To remember that is not to feel guilt, but to feel gratitude, and to approach history with softness, humility, and care. The Romans built a world both brilliant and cruel, both ordered and unjust. And from their contradictions, we inherited not just their systems, but their questions. What does it mean to be free? What do we owe to one another? And what will the future make of us when our own time becomes history? Let the questions drift. Let the night settle again over the ruins, over the fields, over the sea. The empire sleeps, and with it, the echoes of its chains. What remains is the quiet truth that humanity endures, learning, forgetting, remembering again. Like the tide washing over ancient stones, softening them, shaping them, never quite erasing what was. And in that rhythm of memory and sleep, of time and silence, we find the calmest wisdom history can offer, the knowledge that all things pass, and that even the deepest shadows fade with dawn. There is a special kind of silence that belongs only to ruins. It is not emptiness, but presence, a stillness so complete that it hums softly with the weight of centuries. As the sun sets over the remains of the Roman world, that silence deepens. The last light glows warm against crumbling arches. Dust drifts lazily in the air, golden in the fading sun. And for a moment, the past feels almost alive again. Not in noise or motion, but in the quiet persistence of memory. By the 4th century, the empire that once seemed eternal had begun to fade. The roads still stretched across mountains and valleys, the aqueducts still carried water, and the legions still marched. But the pulse was slower, the rhythm more uncertain. The emperors ruled not from Rome, but from distant cities: Ravenna, Milan, Constantinople. The marble heart of the empire, once crowded with senators and slaves, merchants and magistrates, grew quieter. The city still stood, vast, dignified, proud, but much like an aging giant, it carried its own weight with weary grace. The streets that once rang with the clatter of chariots now echoed softly with the footsteps of monks. Temples to Jupiter became churches for Christ. The names of old gods faded from lips, replaced by new prayers whispered under flickering lamps. Change came not as a crash, but as a sigh. The fall of Rome was not a single night of ruin, but a long, slow twilight. And through that twilight moved the descendants of slaves and masters alike, their fates now indistinguishable under the calm, leveling hand of time. Even as empires changed and faith shifted, the rhythm of work continued. Fields still needed tilling, bread still needed baking, children still needed care. For those who toiled in obscurity, the farmers, the builders, the servants, history's grand transitions mattered little. What they knew was the turning of seasons, the creak of the plough, the warmth of the hearth at day's end. In this constancy lay a kind of peace. The empire rose and fell, but the hands that worked the soil remained steady. The world transformed above them, yet their quiet labors endured, a rhythm older than Rome itself. And perhaps, in their unrecorded patience, they were the true guardians of civilization. Imagine now the centuries passing like the slow drift of clouds. The marble crumbles, the names fade, grass grows over roads that once carried armies. But memory is never truly lost, it simply changes shape. In medieval monasteries, scribes bent over parchment, their quills scratching softly in candlelight. They copied the words of Roman poets and philosophers, not as conquerors, but as caretakers. Every stroke preserved a fragment of the vanished empire. And so, Rome survived, not in power, but in thought, not in marble, but in memory. Its stories, its laws, its languages all flowed quietly into new civilizations, like rivers merging into the sea. Through all this transformation, one thing remained constant: the human desire for meaning. The slaves who dreamed of freedom, the freedmen who sought dignity, the masters who feared decline, all shared the same fragile condition. They lived, they worked, they hoped, and they faded. And in their stories, the listener can find echoes of their own life, the longing for peace, for belonging, for rest. The ancient Roman night was filled with the same soft sounds that surround us now. The rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the faint whisper of wind against stone. Different centuries, same heartbeat. In remembering them, we do not merely study history. We enter its rhythm. The slow dismantling of power. As the Western Empire declined, something curious happened. Slavery, that ancient cornerstone of Roman society, began to fade, not through revolution, but through quiet transformation. The old system of man and master gave way to something new: serfdom. Land replaced the whip. The bond was no longer ownership, but obligation. It was not freedom, but it was something different, a slow reshaping of dependence, a step, however small, toward a gentler world. The descendants of slaves became peasants, the descendants of masters became lords, and the empire's vast machinery of control softened into the slower rhythm of medieval life. The fields that once fed the legions now sustained villages. The grand marble villas gave way to humble churches, and in that change, quiet, gradual, inevitable, the empire found its afterlife. Every civilization leaves behind not only monuments, but lessons, often whispered, rarely shouted. Rome, in all its brilliance and brutality, taught humanity something subtle, that even the smallest life carries value. The slaves who tilled the fields, the freedmen who built shops, the women who tended homes, they sustained the world far longer than emperors did. When we study their lives, we glimpse the endurance of the ordinary. Their struggles, though silent, outlasted the roar of conquest. History's loudest moments often fade quickly, its quietest ones endure. As centuries passed, the empire's edges dissolved. The legions vanished into legend. The language fractured into new tongues, Italian, French, Spanish, and Rome itself, once the heart of the world, became a ruin, a place where pilgrims walked softly among broken columns, listening for echoes. Nature reclaimed what empire abandoned. Vines crept up the marble walls, birds nested in the cracks of old statues. The Tiber flowed on, indifferent as ever, and beneath that quiet decay lay something profound, a kind of peace that no triumphal arch could ever contain. The world that once lived by the lash now rested in the hands of time. The chains that once clinked in the fields were silent, dissolved into dust. Standing among those ruins, even now, one feels the paradox of Rome, the weight of its history and the calm of its absence. There is no more empire, no more master or slave, no more senate, no more Caesar. Only the wind, the stones, the shadows. And yet, in that stillness, something endures, the quiet resilience of human life. Every ruin is both an ending and a beginning. The empire ended, but the people remained. Their descendants carried the memory forward, reshaped, retold, reborn. The story of Rome is, at its core, not about conquest, but continuity. As the stars rise over the sleeping city, imagine standing there, the ruins cool beneath your hand, the night air gentle on your skin. You might hear the faintest murmur, not of soldiers or senators, but of time itself flowing softly like water. That sound is history breathing, slowly, endlessly, peacefully. Every civilization, no matter how grand, comes to rest. And in that rest, there is no tragedy, only transformation. Rome did not truly fall. It simply changed form. It became the soil of new worlds, the roots of new languages, the foundation of all that came after, and like all things that live, it returned to stillness. Let your mind drift there, among those quiet ruins. The air cool, the stars distant, the world vast and calm. You are not in the past or present, but somewhere in between, where history becomes dream and dream becomes peace. The empire sleeps, and so may you. There is a peculiar calm that settles after the end of things, when the noise fades, when the crowds disperse, when the final stone falls from the wall. What remains is silence, but not the silence of absence, the silence of completion. The Roman Empire, once so vast it seemed immortal, has now become little more than a whisper in the world's long memory. And yet, even in that whisper, something continues to live. A quiet rhythm, a reminder of all that once was, and all that will always be, the steady pulse of human life. When we think of the end of Rome, we imagine chaos, invasions, fires, the crash of marble statues. But endings, in truth, are rarely sudden. They drift in slowly, like twilight over a great city. In the last days, people did not speak of a fall. They went on living, fetching water, lighting lamps, bartering bread. A senator might still dictate a letter. A craftsman might still mend a sandal. A mother might still whisper to her child. The empire did not vanish in one night. It simply went to sleep. Its people carried on, unaware that they were the last to live beneath its ancient weight. And like a sleeper it dreamed through the centuries, its ideas and words carried forward in the minds of monks, scholars, and wanderers. In that sense, Rome never died. It merely rested. If you walk among the ruins today, perhaps at dawn, when the world is still pale with morning mist, you can still hear it. Not with your ears, but somewhere deeper. The faint echo of footsteps where marble once gleamed, the sigh of wind through broken arches, the slow, patient rhythm of time breathing. Every empire leaves behind such echoes. They are softer than memory, older than regret. They remind us that everything built by human hands eventually returns to stillness. The stones of Rome are not gone. They have simply changed purpose. Many were carried away to build houses, walls, cathedrals. Bits of the Colosseum became part of medieval Rome, then Renaissance Rome, then the modern city that still beats above its bones. The past does not vanish. It reshapes itself. It sleeps within us, in the languages we speak, the laws we follow, the dreams we dream. In Rome's time, to be free was everything. Freedom was the language of pride, of identity, of worth. But freedom, as the centuries wore on, took on another meaning, the quiet kind that comes not from victory, but from release. There is a strange mercy in being forgotten. To fade gently from memory is not always a loss. Sometimes it is peace. The slaves who once labored in the villas, who cooked, cleaned, raised children, built roads, their names are mostly lost. Yet their presence lingers everywhere. Every stone they laid, every amphora they carried, every wall they polished, it all remains quiet, enduring. They are gone, but their labor became the bones of a civilization that outlasted them by millennia. Their lives dissolved into the greater whole. And in that dissolution, there is a kind of eternal rest, the same rest the empire itself now enjoys. Freedom, it seems, is not always about motion or choice. Sometimes it is about stillness, about being part of something vast enough to continue when we cannot. The philosopher Marcus Aurelius, himself a Roman emperor, once wrote that time is like a river, a rushing stream of all that happens, its events bearing one upon another. He saw clearly what few rulers ever do, that the world's power and pride are fleeting, and that wisdom lies not in grasping, but in letting go. If you imagine time as that river, you can almost see it, flowing gently over the stones of the past, carrying the fragments of Rome along its surface. A word in Latin here, a road that still runs straight after 2,000 years, a legal phrase, a building style, a fragment of marble unearthed by chance. It all drifts together, carried by the current of memory. And just as a river carries both silt and sparkle, so history carries both greatness and grief. Neither disappears. Both settle slowly into the deep, forming the quiet bedrock of what we call civilization. There is a comfort in remembering, but there is also comfort in release. Rome, at its height, was heavy with remembrance, names carved into triumphal arches, heroes cast in bronze, laws inscribed on tablets. Yet even stone erodes, even the sharpest letters soften, even emperors become dust. And perhaps that is not a tragedy, but a truth whispered to us by the ruins themselves, that nothing need last forever to have mattered. Memory gives meaning, but forgetting gives peace. The world cannot hold every story, nor every name, but it can hold their echoes, and sometimes echoes are enough. When you think of the countless lives that moved through Rome, the slaves and the masters, the builders and the poets, the mothers and the soldiers, you begin to see history not as a line, but as a fabric. Each life a thread, crossing and intertwining with others, some bright, some dark, but all part of the same weave. When the empire fell, those threads did not tear. They shifted, wove new patterns, became new stories told in new lands. The spirit of Rome flowed into monasteries, into the laws of distant kingdoms, into the very architecture of our cities. Its pulse continues, steady, quiet, patient, not in the roar of conquest, but in the persistence of order, of thought, of art. Even the humblest Roman slave, unseen, unnamed, was part of that enduring rhythm. In their labor, the world continued, and in that continuation, they achieved the truest kind of immortality. Not the immortality of names, but of contribution. Imagine now that the world has gone completely still. The empire is gone. The night stretches deep and cool over the Mediterranean. The roads are empty. The temples are quiet. The fountains no longer run. And in that great hush, the stones themselves seem to sleep. You walk through the forum, now half buried in earth and silence. The moonlight glides over broken columns, soft as water. You can almost hear the hum of centuries, the faint, endless sound of time settling into itself. Somewhere nearby, an olive tree still grows. Its roots twist through the ruins. Its leaves shimmer silver in the breeze. It has watched empires rise and fall, and still it lives. There beneath the stars, Rome dreams, not of war, not of conquest, but of rest. The same rest the slaves once longed for after the day's labor. The same rest the emperors sought, though few ever found it. Now at last they all share the same stillness. The empire is gone. The night stretches deep and cool over the Mediterranean. The roads are empty. The temples are quiet. The fountains no longer run. And in that great hush, the stones themselves seem to sleep. You walk through the forum, now half buried in earth and silence. The moonlight glides over broken columns, soft as water. You can almost hear the hum of centuries, the faint, endless sound of time settling into itself. Somewhere nearby, an olive tree still grows. Its roots twist through the ruins. Its leaves shimmer silver in the breeze. It has watched empires rise and fall, and still it lives. There, beneath the stars, Rome dreams, not of war, not of conquest, but of rest. The same rest the slaves once longed for after the day's labor. The same rest the emperors sought, though few ever found it. Now at last, they all share the same stillness. The strange thing about history is that it is never truly past. Every story we tell, every ruin we touch, brings the past gently into the present. When you hear the word Rome, you are not thinking of a vanished world. You are breathing with it. It lives in your imagination, and there, it never truly fades. Time folds softly around it like layers of silk. The centuries drift, but the essence remains. In this way, every listener becomes a quiet traveler through time, not racing toward discovery, but drifting toward understanding. Rome becomes not a place, but a state of mind, a slow remembering, a tranquil dream of civilization. Empires, like people, grow weary. They build, they shine, they falter, and they sleep. Rome sleeps now, not in death but in rest. Its stones at peace, its names whispered in 1,000 languages. Its dream lingers, in the arches we still admire, in the laws we still quote, in the stories we still tell. Every great power eventually becomes history, and every history becomes silence. But silence, too, has its own kind of eternity. It asks for nothing, demands nothing. It simply exists, gentle and unbroken. And in that stillness, there is grace. As the night deepens and the mind grows quiet, imagine yourself drifting through that silence, past the ruins, past the centuries, into the boundless calm that lies beyond memory. You are not a visitor to history anymore. You are part of it. The same breath that once filled Roman streets now fills your lungs. The same starlight that shone on their empire now glows faintly outside your window. The difference between then and now is only time. And time, like the river Marcus Aurelius described, flows ever onward, soft, patient, eternal. Let it carry you. Let it wash away the noise of the present, the heaviness of thought, the restlessness of waking life. For in the great sleep of empires, and in the small, nightly sleep of human beings, there is the same truth, that all things pass, and that in their passing they find peace. You have walked through Rome. You have seen its rise and fall, its triumphs and its quiet decline. You have followed the lives of those forgotten and the dreams of those who dreamed too greatly. Now you stand at the edge of time itself, watching as history closes its eyes. When empires sleep, so does the noise of the world. And what remains is the soft heartbeat of eternity, slow, steady, endless. Let it guide you into your own quiet rest. The story has ended, but the peace it leaves behind will linger gently, like the whisper of wind through Roman stone. There is a moment just before dawn when the world holds its breath. It is neither night nor day, a space between. History too has such moments, not of war or glory, but of stillness, the quiet aftermath of all things built and broken. In that stillness the Roman world lingers, not as empire, not as memory, but as rhythm, a slow, steady rhythm that beats through time like the pulse of an ancient heart. The eternal routine. Imagine, for a final time, a Roman morning. The city is asleep. The air smells faintly of smoke and olive oil. Somewhere a rooster calls, and in the grey half-light a figure stirs, a slave rising before the sun. Their movements are practiced, gentle. A basin of water is fetched, a small fire coaxed to life. Bread laid on the table for a master still dreaming. There is no glory here, no tragedy, just the soft persistence of daily life. The world is quiet except for the faint crackle of fire and the distant sound of wheels on stone. These are the sounds that built civilization, routine, endurance, service. Every empire at its heart is not the work of kings or generals, but of hands like these, hands that clean, carry, build, and mend. The story of Rome is more than anything the story of labor, unseen, uncelebrated, unending. And in that endlessness, there is peace, the hum of continuity. You might think of history as a series of great events, wars, reigns, inventions, discoveries. But beneath it all runs a hum, the constant quiet effort of ordinary life. That hum never stops. It was there in the Roman streets, in the villas, in the fields. It is there still, in the factories and kitchens of our world. The settings change, but the rhythm remains. It is the sound of humanity continuing, regardless of who rules, who owns, or who is remembered. This continuity is the gentlest form of immortality, to live not in the mind of history, but in the fabric of existence itself. The Romans called it mos maiorum, the way of the ancestors. It was not law, but habit, not doctrine, but rhythm. And in that rhythm, even slaves found a strange kind of belonging. For to follow the rhythm of the world is to be part of something vast. The grace of the ordinary. In every life, no matter how constrained, there is a moment of grace, a breath under the morning sky, a glance toward the sea. The comfort of knowing that the day, however long, will end. Perhaps a Roman slave once paused while sweeping a courtyard and looked up to see the sunlight spilling through the arches, turning the dust to gold. Perhaps they felt for an instant that they too belonged to that beauty, that they were part of the same light that touched the marble of temples and the skin of emperors. History does not record such moments, but they are what truly endure. The grace of the ordinary, quietly lived, softly forgotten, forever present. The stillness after empire. As the centuries drifted onward, the Roman world dissolved into the soil of new ones. The tools of slaves became relics, their names faded, but the shape of their labor, the roads, the aqueducts, the architecture of daily life remained. The world walked upon their work long after their chains were gone. This is how history redeems itself, by turning pain into permanence, toil into texture. Every stone laid by unseen hands becomes part of the ground we now call home. And so, the empire never truly fell. It transformed from power into presence, from conquest into continuity. The same sun that once burned over Roman fields still shines over our own. The same sea that carried their ships still murmurs against distant shores. We are, all of us, walking through the long shadow of their world, not haunted by it, but cradled in its quiet endurance. The breath of time. If you listen closely enough, not with your ears, but with that part of the mind that dreams, you can almost hear time breathing. It exhales across centuries. It whispers through ruins and across oceans. And in that whisper lies the truth that empires forget, that all things are temporary and all things are connected. The masters and the enslaved, the conquerors and the conquered, each shared the same brief gift of life, the same fleeting rhythm of heart and breath. It is humbling to realize how alike we remain. We still wake, we still work, we still rest. We still build our days from small acts, rising, eating, laboring, sleeping, each one as ancient as civilization itself. Time changes the surface of things, but not their soul. The tenderness of forgetting to forget is not always to lose. Sometimes it is to forgive. The Roman world, for all its grandeur, was also built on cruelty, hierarchy, and pain. Yet as the centuries softened its edges, what remained was not the lash, but the law, not the cruelty, but the craft. History, like the sea, wears away the sharpness of what it holds. It polishes even the roughest stones until they gleam quietly in the light. In forgetting the worst, we allow the best to endure. So when you think of Rome, you might not picture its cruelty. You might think instead of arches and fountains and calm philosophy. You might think of stillness, of beauty, of order. This too is mercy, the mercy of memory reshaped by time. The long road home, somewhere beneath the layers of modern Rome, beneath the traffic and the voices and the lights, the ancient stones still lie. They remember footsteps, the hurried walk of servants, the slow tread of masters, the laughter of children who never knew freedom and never knew why they lacked it. Now, the same stones feel the footsteps of tourists, wanderers, dreamers, and though the world above them has changed completely, the stones remain patient, unchanged in their quiet task, to bear witness. They are perhaps the truest record of humanity, silent, steadfast, enduring. If you could walk there now, alone in the early dawn, you might feel something beneath your feet, a soft vibration, a pulse that is not sound, but memory. It is the world remembering itself. What freedom means. Freedom, in the end, is not just the absence of chains. It is the ability to rest without fear. For centuries, Rome equated freedom with privilege, a status to be earned, bought, or granted. But there is another freedom, older and simpler, the freedom to stop, to lay down one's burden, to be still, to belong not to a master or an empire, but to the quiet itself. That freedom belongs to all now, not given by emperors, but by time. The empire is gone, the masters are gone, the slaves are gone, and yet the world remains, a shared inheritance, open, endless, alive. The past does not hold us. It hums beneath us like the deep note of a sleeping drum, the listener's journey. And now, you, the listener, find yourself drifting at the edge of this long, gentle story. You have walked the streets of ancient Rome. You have stood among its ruins, heard its languages, felt the weight of its history. You have met the unseen, the forgotten, the millions whose names were never carved into stone, but whose hands shaped the very world beneath our feet. Their story now becomes yours. Every breath you take is the same air that once filled Roman lungs. Every heartbeat echoes the same rhythm that carried them through toil and rest, hope and loss. And as you listen, as your breathing slows, as the world around you fades into quiet, you are joining them not in struggle, but in stillness, the peace of impermanence. It may comfort you to know that even the greatest empires end, that even the hardest stone softens, that even the longest story finds its rest. Impermanence is not loss, it is peace in motion. The Romans built for eternity. But eternity belongs not to marble, but to silence. Silence endures. It fills the spaces where words once ruled. It softens what was harsh and calms what was restless. You are surrounded by that silence now. It is not emptiness, it is fullness without noise. It is history, sleeping. The final light, somewhere Far from the city, the first light of morning touches the horizon. The stars dim, the air warms slightly. In the quiet between night and day, you can almost hear the Empire breathing its last, and the new world stirring awake. The slaves, the masters, the soldiers, the poets, all gone now. Their dust mingled in the same earth, but their story lingers, gentle, unhurried, like the last flicker of a candle before dawn. And you, too, may rest. For in remembering them, you have carried their burden long enough. Now it is time to lay it down. Music fades to a near-silent drone, slow, warm, infinite. Breathe. Let the centuries drift away. Let the marble fade to dust, the chains dissolve, the voices quiet. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to carry. Rome sleeps, and in its vast, ancient silence, so may you. So yeah, daily life as a Roman slave. It wasn't all epic chariot races and toga parties. It was hard, humiliating, and often hopeless, but it was also human. These people, forgotten by history, built the empire, cooked the meals, wrote the letters, and cleaned the marble that Rome still stands on today. And maybe, in some strange poetic way, they remind us of something important. Freedom is rarely free, and comfort often rests on the shoulders of the unseen. So, what would you do if you woke up in ancient Rome, wearing chains instead of pajamas? Could you survive the day? Let me know in the comments below. And before you drift off to sleep, or escape your 9 to 5 tomorrow, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us next time for another slow, strange dive into history. This is calm history for sleep. Good night, and may your straw bed be soft.